I love those those three slides are great. And I think I put you a little bit more on the optimistic side of things. Is that? Next is going to be Dave Morse, I think probably with a bit of a Wall Street perspective.
Terrific, great. Thanks, Bob. As Bob mentioned in introducing me, I've spent virtually my entire career in the private equity world. So when I talk about the credit markets and the credit crisis, it's generally from the perspective of leveraged loans and the high yield market. So my lens as I look at the credit markets and the credit crisis is through the private equity LBO world, similar to Sue looks at her world through the mortgage markets and the credit markets through the mortgage markets. And I do have to say, Sue, I was interested in your comments about the trends of disclosure and documentation in mortgages, because I think the only CD I got with my mortgage was Captain and Tennille's Greatest Hits. So focusing on the last year and the credit crisis in terms of the private equity world. When Bob asked me to be on the panel, I reflected on another panel I was on in Chicago in the summer of 2007 in front of institutional investors who would invest in private equity funds like the one that I'm part of. And I was asked to comment on a comment that was made by Steve Schwarzman, who is the CEO of Blackstone. And if you remember at that time, he said, we are in the golden era of private equity. And I was asked to comment on that. And I will say, in the summer of 2007, I felt that we were absolutely at a bubble in the market. It felt very peaky, and it felt like a bubble. We had record numbers of public to private, record premiums paid to the underlying public securities in those public to privates. Peak leverage was being used in those transactions. Purchases were being made off peak earnings and on peak multiples. So I thought at the time that something had to give. And the best recollection I could have at the time was around First Boston and the Ohio Mattress transaction, if you remember that. So I retold the story of how First Boston bridged a $450 million loan to Ohio Mattress. That bridge got hung, and that drove First Boston into the arms of Credit Suisse. So I told that story, and I was going to talk about what I thought was going to blow this bubble up that we were sitting in. I definitively didn't believe it was the golden era of private equity. It turns out here, 2 years later, that no surprise, I was completely wrong about what would blow that bubble up. I argued at the time that we were in a really scary era for the banks and the investment banks. The financing of LBOs and the risk that the banks were taking on their balance sheets was far in excess of anything that First Boston